Good morning. Can you hear me? Hello, hello, hello. Thank you. You can just put it down there. Can you hear me? You can't hear me. Okay. You can. Okay, let me see if I can get it just a little bit louder without. Hello, hello. Is that better? A little better? You a little better? I think it is picking up okay. I think if I get that any louder, it's going to echo. But if you want to you want me to wear your hearing assist? Could do that. Hello, people who are tuning in. We're just trying to, and you all, you're tuning in too. You're in person. I'm trying to get all the tech stuff figured out here. I had tech difficulties this morning. I got here plenty early, and I'm like, yep. And I thought, oh, I'll have plenty of time. I'm going to get things set up, and it'll be, if there's issues, I'll have time to work it out. Got everything set up with the sound system. That's the thing that I had, or the computer system. That's the thing that I had problems with last time. And that all went great. And then I went to go pull my computer out, and my computer that I've never had any problems with, black screen, wouldn't come up. And so I start texting. Like, the tech committee is like going to be sick of me on Thursdays, from now on, because it seems like I can't get away with not texting them. But after about 45 minutes, I finally got something to come up, which meant that the 15 hours of work that I did on it the last 2 days didn't go away. So I printed that all off real quick, and I think we're okay. I want to test one more thing. When we get to times when we're going to pass around the microphone, I want to make sure that this is loud enough so that you guys can hear it here, but so that it's also picked up on the live stream. Would anybody like to say anything into the microphone, please? A little bit more. Check, 1, 2, 3. Huh. Try it again.
Check, 1, 2, 3.
Better? Yay. Thank you very much. So that's just a reminder when it comes to if anybody wants to make a comment, raise your hand, let me bring the microphone. And if anybody wants to volunteer to run the microphone around, that would, not be a horrible thing. You want to do that? It'll keep you engaged, right? Okay. So I have this set up like this, with this screen kind of that way, because that is the camera that I am kind of addressing things to. So those of you who are over here, if you feel like I'm ignoring you, I'm really not trying to. You're just a little bit out of my line of sight. So how is everybody doing? Good. So I wanted to get into a little bit this morning what our kind of basis for this conversation started off with. The three of us pastors, last year when we did stuff, we had kind of an outline, like a basic outline that was ready to go. And we did the research and filled in the blanks on all of that stuff. We had kind of, things, there was a plan, right? When we got together this time, we're like, what are we going to do? And there were a few things that were brought up. And one of the things that was brought up was this book called Hunting Magic Eels. The tagline on it is Recovering an Enchanted Faith in a Skeptical Age. Some of the things that Pastor Bob touched on last week included the discussion about the rise of the nuns, right? And it's, when I told some people, the rise of the nuns, the nuns in habits. That's not what it is. That's the image that I always get. But it's the rise of the people who are not affiliated with any particular religion. And so what he brought up is you can look on the Pew Form of a Religion and see some of that stuff. We went over it last time, but those of you who weren't here, if you want to go and look at that, you can look at that. You can look at our presentation from last week and see what that is all about. That is a part of what the author brings up. The author, his name is Richard Beck, and he is a professor of psychology at Abilene Christian University in Texas. And the book covers a lot of stuff that I really do love. He looks at Celtic spirituality, mysticism, contemplation. He even sprinkles in Tolkien, like who doesn't love Tolkien, C.S. Lewis. And he uses it to make the case that Christianity today does not need a more robust theology or more clever apologetics or more worthy causes or more kind of heroic sanctity, but he thinks that it needs a more enchanted worldview. And you can go and look up the story about the magic eels and this well and this place that people made wishes. That's where this kind of, in this medieval time, that people thought this well was enchanted and they went and they made wishes on it. Just made for an interesting and kind of compelling title. Not the point of the book. So Beck's idea is that enchantment is the ability to see and experience God as a living and vital presence in our lives, in our everyday lives. And it's the capacity to recognize God's presence. And it's also for him, he believes in the entire spiritual cosmology, heaven and hell, angels and demons, miracles and supernatural powers. And wonders. So we all probably have our own kind of idea of what all of those things are. And he posits that we've lost our belief in spiritual and supernatural reality because of the increasing centrality of the scientific empirical worldview that enables us to create technological marvels, but has subtly undermined our human capacity for wonder, imagination, the interior life, and belief. He says that we have stopped believing in God because our empirical worldview has made it both unnecessary and impossible to believe. This is him, right? So then the rest of his book is about how do we recover or re-enchant our disenchanted world. And his thing is that he invites us to start paying attention. He wants us to linger over the wonders and marvels that life brings our way, remembering that some of life's greatest joys invite us outside of the realm of what can be scientifically measured. So what he's really doing is he is calling us into the world of mysticism, mystery, right? Connectedness to God. He's inviting us into this kind of world of wonder where science can explain a lot of things, but there are some things that science cannot explain. And he offers a variety of ways that we can learn to pay attention to the ache or an existential restlessness, existential crisis. And this was very famously summed up well in St. Augustine's prayers. Our hearts are restless until they rest in you. That's the ache, right? He talks about the ache in this book of being a problem of much of a generation that is not connected to God, but there's depression, there is anxiety, there is a need for something greater than ourselves and greater in community. And he tells a story about paying attention to eccentric experiences in our lives. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. But one of the stories that he brings up is the story of Johnny Cash, who was in the peak of his drug addiction. And when he was in the peak of his drug addiction, he became suicidal and he went off into a cave. And while he was considering ending his life, he was in this cave and he heard an interior voice say to him, "I am still here." That's what he reports that he heard. And then the question becomes, is that the voice of God that was speaking to him? Was it an angel? Was it Cash's own soul? Was it his own psyche saying, "No, I'm still here"? But the point of that experience is that it was an eccentric experience that invited him to see the world from a new perspective, which may have been the turning point that saved his life. So I want to pause for a second. I don't want you guys to think about, have you ever had an experience that is beyond your explanation? All right, hold on 1 second. Do you want to share it? You can, okay.
When I turned 28, I was just lost. And I prayed one night crying to Lord. I said, "Lord, I'm messing up my life. You take over and tell me what to do." And he did. Everything pointed to joining the military. I went to my mom, I told her, and she's like, "You lost your mind." No way you can do the military.
Yeah.
And I said, "Mom, the Lord is telling me to do this." And she's like, "Well, then you have to."
Yeah.
So I did. And I lost my thought, check of
It
thought.
changed, that was a turning point for you, kind of like a linchpin in your life.
When I joined, 2 years in or so, they found a tumor, and it was cancerous. If I had not joined, I would be dead, for
Wow.
sure, because I was a waitress.
They wouldn't have found it. Yeah.
And if they did, they wouldn't have done much about it because I didn't have very good insurance. And they brought me in at a time when I got to see he was renowned in the United States, a renowned neurosurgeon. And he operated on me, and then he left a week later.
Yeah.
And then the next week came, and then the oncologist came in, and he had worked with a world-renowned brain cancer researcher at the NIH. And so between those two, the neurosurgeon and the oncologist, they saved my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the researcher at the NIH, he prescribed me a medication to take called temozolomide, I believe. And that pill is like, the series of pills that you have to take is over $10,000.
Wow.
And the Air Force paid for it all.
Wow. Yeah. Definitely an experience that defies our explanation. That, yeah. Can anybody else think of things that have happened to you? You don't have to share the story, but you can think about it. And I've had people who have told me stories of experiencing angels, what they believe to be angels. I have had experiences myself of hearing things, and yeah, I have seen a psychologist. and there's nothing wrong. Yeah.
This is just a little thing, but one Christmas we were getting together, my whole family was getting together. And we don't get together Christmas Day, we get together like the Saturday after. And my whole family was there. All my nieces, my nephews, my brothers, my sisters. Very seldom with us being in different places in college and all of that. My husband was there, and I had 2 children at the time that were there. And we had to leave early for some reason. And as I was leaving, this voice said, "We aren't ever going to be together again." I had no idea. I told my husband, turn around, go back. I went and talked to every person in my family, told them I loved them. My mother died 3 days later.
Wow.
Totally unexpected.
Yeah.
Totally unexpected.
Right.
But something told me to turn around.
Yeah. And that defies our explanation of what could have possibly happened. Is it intuition? Is it a gift of the Holy Spirit? We don't know how to define it, and maybe it's fine that we don't define it. But something that I appreciated about this book is the way that he asks us to step back and have wonder and appreciation of the wonder. Now, there are all sorts of things in this book. If you read it, I have problems. Like, there are some problems that I have with this book. He's Protestant, but he's not the same kind of Protestant in the ways that he talks about different things. I just feel like, it's not everything, right? And his dialogue that he has with science, I don't love that part. So when we were having this conversation initially about what we were going to do, we said, okay, this is a great jumping off point, but we're not going to cover this book like chapter for chapter. Feel free to read it, and you'll start to see some of the stuff that, as we're talking about what has been important for us, what we would have appreciated about the book, and then as you hear from us, you'll probably also hear things that we would be, not appreciating about the book as well. Marilyn, I know that you read a good bit of the book, and you had some things as well that were problematic. But it's a provocative book, right? It is. Yeah. Yep. For sure. But for me, one of the things that I want to make sure that we do is that we take this idea of Easter afternoon. That was the thing that we came up with. Okay, Easter has arrived, so now what? Now what do we do? In this modern age, why do we practice what we practice? How do we keep the central thing central? Who are we? What are we doing? And the question that I kept bringing up for myself is, why am I still a part of this? In this day and age, when it would be so easy to walk away from the church and find meaning in other places, create meaning in other places, why do I personally feel compelled to still be here? And I hope that would prompt you to answer that question for yourself, right? To kind of sharpen that edge. To do that, we have to go back in time to a little town called Fertile, Minnesota. My mom laughs. She knows that's where I had my first call. It is also where I have had some of my most impactful, enchanted moments, as the author would call it. So much so that when people ask me in the wild what religion I am, I will say I am a Christian mystic. I do not say first that I am a Lutheran, because then they go, well, what does that mean? They're like, oh, I've heard of Lutheran churches before, sure. a Christian mystic leads into a deeper conversation, and it's always interesting. So in my first call, I was assigned to this town, Fertile, Minnesota, which is a town of about 900 people in northern Minnesota. I had never lived that far north before, and I was freaked out about living up there. Like, why are they sending me to the middle of nowhere? What is going on? And I was working with a senior pastor, and it was a 5-point parish. And he had been working on his own for a couple of years. He had been covering a 5-point parish by himself for a couple of years, and they were definitely large enough that they needed to have 2, maybe 3 pastors. Because in a town of 900 people, we had 1,500 members. You're like, math is not mathing. Farmland all around. It covered a wide area. His wife was very sick. She had been the other called pastor, but she was really not able to work, and so he was covering for her. That's why I say he was doing things on his own. And so when he came, I was fresh out of school, and I'm like, I can do this. Overachiever. I can, I've always been able to handle myself in school and stuff. I can do all this stuff. And so he basically took vacation for about 6 months. He was around, but he was around on Sunday mornings, and he was in the office for a couple hours a day. Maybe. A couple hours a week, really. And I was putting in about 80 hours a week of work, right? And I was getting good results. I was trying all the things that I learned at school, And about, I don't even remember, about a year or 2 into all of this, the 2009 churchwide assembly decision came down about allowing same-sex clergy to serve, and it caused, a major rift in a lot of our congregations. And the same was true in ours. There were some people that left, not many actually, because the community was so closely tied together. But there was another non-denominational church in town, and there were a couple of people that just said that they couldn't be involved anymore. But the whole thing was very stressful for me and a lot of my other first call pastor colleagues. And we ended up forming a support group. And this support group got connected with the synod, and the synod then connected us with a man named Daniel Wolpert, who had a retreat center that was being built, literally being built. It had the shell of the place. And we would meet in the shell of this building, and we would have prayer support group. And he walked us through all of this stuff. He is a contemplative, mystical Christian, and he ended up becoming my spiritual director. He's written several books, and he's traveled all over the place, and he's just kind of a spiritual nomad, right? And so he opened me up to a whole bunch of new things that I had never experienced before. I think, as you may know, our tradition, the Lutheran tradition, has a very heavy academic base. We value university over most other things. So much so that when I have been involved in academic settings that are about spiritual formation, when I bring up spiritual formation and how to do it, I get higher-ups that say, but that's not how we do things. And I say, but it saved my life. Doing this actually saved my life in your academic settings. So as a group, we were learning how to be contemplative Christians together. We were supporting each other. We were doing all of this healing. We were learning how to take what we were learning in this group and bring it into our congregations. And what ended up happening is none of our congregations actually broke up. We were able to hold all of this angst in tension. But in tension that actually brought us closer together. And that was a mystical experience that defied, all of our expectations. We expected, all of us first called pastors in the middle of nowhere, that all of our communities were going to completely fall apart, and they never did. But what he ended up doing was teaching us how to pay attention to what the Holy Spirit is up to learn to pay attention to where it is that we are being kind of nudged to go. And it came in extremely helpful for me when I ended up getting sick because I was working so many hours. You remember this very well. I'm pointing at my mother. I got very sick for a while, ended up going to specialist after specialist trying to figure out what was going on. And they finally decided, well, maybe it's Lyme disease, maybe it's not. Had all these positive tests, but then I had some negative tests, and then they treated me for it, and then maybe not, and we don't know exactly what's going on. And really, yeah, I was probably sick, but I was also working 80 hours a week. I would have people that would say, the property committee would come to me and they'd be like, you really, really, really need to turn off your office light. You can't have it on in the middle of the night. You're wasting a whole bunch of energy. And they would say this as they were on their way home from the bar, because that's when the bar was closing, and they would see that my light was on. And I said, but I was working. I was in my office working. They're like, why? Why were you doing that? I'm like, because I'm trying to get everything done. We have 100 kids coming in for confirmation tomorrow, and I have to, have to be ready for it. Nobody's helping me. I began engaging in, when I got sick like that, thousands of dollars of medical debt, right? And really no answers and really no help. I started doing a program with my spiritual director that was called Health and Spirituality. And he took a year. It was a whole year program. He and 2 other people on his team would sit down with me every month, and we would look at all of these different aspects of my life. He would give me all of these different prayer practices to do, and it included conversations with an integrative medical doctor, with kind of a caseworker person that would walk me through all of this stuff. But what it was teaching me how to pay attention to my whole person, how to pay attention to my body, mind, spirit, and all of those things began to change once I engaged in that program. I experienced more healing during that year of doing that than I did in the 2 years previous of going to specialists. And other people were starting to recognize that was happening. I started doing all of this stuff and sharing all of this stuff with my colleagues of how it was helpful and how this formation stuff was like actually physically changing my life. So much so that I had a colleague who was doing a program for first call pastors that it was in our 2 neighboring synods, and they needed somebody who would be the pastor to those pastors. I became the pastor to those pastors for those 2 years, and the whole program was about spiritual formation and learning how to pay attention. And those included things like contemplative prayer, being open to having conversations about mystical experience, and it's amazing how spending that time leaning into those practices, they're not hard. They're not hard. Changed the landscape of that area. Because I was working with the pastors then in turn did it with all of the people in their congregations, right? And so all of a sudden you have people who are able to learn how to pay attention to the movements of the Holy Spirit, to sit in awe and wonder of them, and then make actionable decisions based on those things. It seems like a pretty deep way of being community. It is. So one of the things that I wanted to show you guys is to draw your attention to how we pay attention. All right. Is it up there? It's up there. There's going to be a task on here for you, and I might play it a couple times.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team white have?
All right. Did you get it? You want me to do it again? 11? You counted 15? 13? Okay. You want me to do it again so you can see? Okay.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team white have?
$13? 13, 14? Okay, I'm going to let the rest of it go.
The answer is 13. But did you see the moon walking there?
Yes, it's because of the glare. So, this is for paying attention to cyclists, right? But like the case in point, it's easy to miss something that you're not looking for, right? So, if we want to have a deep, meaningful experience with God, we have to start looking, not only looking, expecting to see it. So, I have been a student and a teacher of the contemplative life of prayer for the past, that's a lot of years now, 15, 16 years. And many of you who go here will notice that I will occasionally kind of sprinkle some contemplative practices into things. So one of the things that we have done recently is Lectio Divina during our Lenten services. That is simply a prayerful way of reading Scripture. I don't know, some of you have experienced that. It was different, right? Yeah, it was an interesting way of encountering Scripture. It is pulling us away from the purely academic. There is a place for the purely academic, and we do that on Bible study, right? We study the Bible, yep. And we dig into all sorts of scholarly sources for that, and there's a place for it. But there is also a place for prayerful experience of just being with the text and letting it speak to us. And so we have done that with Lectio Divina. We have also kind of dived into just silent prayer, or what we call apophatic prayer, which just means nothing. During that time of prayer, the goal is to have nothing happening. There is no words. We are just supposed to be silent and be in the presence of God. I like to think of it as, and I always describe it to children in this way, Think of what it's like to go up to the person that you love and trust the most and sit in their lap as a child, right? And to put your head right on their chest, on their heart, and listen for their heartbeat. That's the same kind of presence of sitting in that silence that we're looking for. It's a time of consolation. There are so many different kinds of prayer, and I'm wondering if any of you who are here who have maybe experienced some of the stuff with me are remembering any kinds of prayer that you have used that have been helpful for you. There was one that you couldn't remember the other day that you thought would be useful, but you couldn't remember it, and that was the Jesus prayer. Yep. And that's something is almost a thought intervention where you say as a mantra over and over again, Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me. The way that I have taught these in the past is that I get a group of people together and we start covering and teaching about the history and practice. So we get the academic part of it, right? We get the history and practice of a particular prayer, and then we try it. And the problem that I have encountered with doing that is that we have as many different types of prayer styles as we have learning styles. Some of us learn better by hearing. Some of us learn better by movement. Some of us learn better by writing. And there are scientific reasons for that. But I have not been able to, on my own, pinpoint how do we know which prayer style is actually going to work for a particular person. So in this last year, I have started to do some study into neuromeditation techniques. This is a field of study that actually looks at your brain waves, what's going on for you with your level of anxiety, depression, whether you have ADHD tendencies, any sort of neurotypical thing that is going on, because most of us, I don't even know how to define typical anymore. Most of us have some sort of uniqueness that's going on for us, right? But it's all on a scale. It's all on a spectrum that can actually be quantified. So I now have some tools that will help me to assess you so that we can start with prayer practices that actually might be more beneficial for you at that particular time. Because the problem that I've run into is that if we start with prayer type A, and you are very averse to prayer type A, we might get to prayer type D or E before we find any that starts to actually work for you. And the problem is, A through E actually might be harmful for you because it changes, there are physical things that happen in your brain's makeup with the brain waves that are being utilized that can actually make things worse. So, for you today, this is the first time that I'm using this assessment with a group. I have brought neuromeditation styles inventory. And what I am starting to do is the program that I did is very secular, recognizing that there are all sorts of crossovers with different kinds of spirituality. Contemplative Christian spirituality has all sorts of crossover with secular meditation and Buddhist meditation and Islamic meditation. Like, they all have things that are in common. So what I have started to do is to categorize the different kinds of Christian contemplative prayer, how they fit into these different categories, so that I can say, hey, this is what you might want to try first. So I'm going to hand these out, and I would like you to take a few minutes and fill them out. This is interesting. There's exactly enough for all of us. It's meant to be. What a coincidence. Yes. Does anybody need a pen? You need a pen? Pencil's fine. There you go. If you want to keep that pen, you can. Is this self-explanatory enough? I like the number 5 on quiet mind. My thoughts create problems for me. So technically, you're supposed to do the math on this. So if y'all have phone calculators, you can do that. So, yeah. So what you're supposed to do is, so after you've got your numbers in here, add them up, put them down at the bottom, transfer it onto the next page. So you'll put your number in this little category here. So 23 divided by 50 times 100. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's what it's asking you to do. So my focus one, the number I put was 23. Yeah. The ones that say 50, just take your score and multiply it by 2. The only one you really need to do any sort of math on is the second one, and I don't know why they didn't. So your number, double it. Yep. Yeah, so yours is 38, yeah. Yeah, so you're 44. Mm-hmm. So 20, you're going to do 20 divided by 40 times 100. Here, I can get it for you. No, hold on a second, 20. It's 50. Nope, this is 50. What were you looking at? So 14 by 40 times 100, 35.
Times 100?
35. It's 35. You close? I could bet you guys didn't think you were coming to do math problems. Can I help anybody get their numbers? I can. Here, let me take your sheet and I'll just. That's 50, 48. What's your quiet mind one?
I don't know. Where was that?
Right here.
Oh. So what do you do? 25
This this is 60. 48.
How are you?
Let me get, because the trick is that you just double that. I just know. That one is 52.
Okay.
All right. Do you have yours? Do you need any help? No, I'm done. You're done. Okay. Anybody else need help getting theirs done? Okay. All right, raise your hand for me if you're done. Done. All right. So let's talk about this a little bit. How many had, and remember, this is a self-assessment, so you might have chosen to be very extreme with your answers, or you might have chosen to be very conservative, right? I kind of find it helpful on these to be extreme with your answers, because nobody else is looking at it. Like, who cares? It's not like you're being evaluated for anything other than what we're doing right here. So you want to get the thing that's actually going to be the most helpful for you. So just be extreme with your answers. Instead of not really wanting to admit that you get distracted by stuff, be like, I do get distracted by stuff. I'm going to call that an 8 or a 9 instead of a 5. You know, other people I might admit it's a 5, but right, it's just me. So how many of you had an area that clearly is a problem area? You got one? And I don't necessarily mean like it's a real problem, like that's just your highest thing. Okay. Okay. All right. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. The higher the score, the more likely it says it's an area of concern for you. Yeah. The higher the score, the more likely that's an area of concern for you. Okay? So the reason why we have these divided into these 4 different categories is because these are 4 different meditation areas. And all of these meditation areas have particular brainwave patterns that are associated with it. Okay? So, something that I have gotten into the habit of doing is taking this assessment on a weekly basis to kind of check in with myself and see where I am, what I'm doing, and what kind of prayer actually might be helpful for me during that week. I want you to turn to the last page that we have here. Yeah. And I'm clearly not going to be getting into all of the different kinds of prayer today. This is just kind of an introduction for a thing that can be super helpful for teaching us, to give us tools of how to pay attention to God in our life in ways that will affect our mental, physical, spiritual health. So, how many of you focus was your thing? Focus, okay. Your higher score. Focus was your higher score. So you might want to pay attention to this. So the focus meditation type, it's voluntary control of attention and cognition, your think meat stuff, how you think. It increases fast brain waves. It improves focus, attention, executive functioning, brain brightening, and it's a match for ADHD. What we know about ADHD is that your fast brain waves are actually slow. That's why they get put on stimulants. It's also why people who have ADHD, when they do things like self-medicate with coffee, they don't end up bouncing off the walls. They act more normal, right? Because you're increasing your fast brain waves. Focus meditation types can be things such as sitting quietly and paying attention, learning how to pay attention to your breathing. Apophatic prayer might be the thing for you, where you just kind of sit and you be with God, right? But for you, you might want to add in paying attention to your breath, doing things like paying attention to the breathing in and out, what that feels like in your nostrils, or paying attention to a place in your body like your diaphragm, focusing on that. Sometimes we need to do things like use a word or a mantra to help bring our focus back. Because it is not about being a perfect focuser, it's about training your brain to focus. So every time that you have to focus, you're teaching your brain how to focus, and you get better at it every single time that you do it. For some people who are dealing with more extreme kind of ADHD things, it's helpful to even do a standing prayer where you take a posture like this and you hold your hands like this, where you're kind of in a neutral position, and you do the same breathing thing. And you pay attention to those things, okay? So if you find yourself having a hard time doing that kind of prayer and you just want to spend time doing it, try adding in that kind of thing. You also might want to try something like Qigong or Tai Chi. That might be a practice that would actually work very well for you. Okay, mindfulness, that next one. Was that one for you? Yeah? Okay. Mindfulness meditation practice is a non-judgmental awareness of the present moment. So you're going to increase slow brain waves. Frontal midline theta. That doesn't necessarily mean anything to most of you. Experience calm and distance from thoughts, feelings, sensation. It's a match for stress and anxiety. Okay? These types of prayers are going to be kinds that are good to do when you're in the midst of having a very anxious period of your life. There are ones that you can do that, I would often say they're kind of grounding techniques, right? And really what it does is it resets your nervous system to kind of get you out of fight or flight, which is often what's happening in your body when you get triggered by an anxiety attack. These are kind of good things to do, especially if you're used to reaching for medication all of the time to handle those things. You might not have that with you, or you might want to take a step away from having to use medication all the time, right? So if you can learn some techniques to get your body out of that before you have to do it, by all means, get the medication. This is not a replacement for that. It's a supplement to that if you need it. But if you feel like, I can do this thing and I think I'll be okay, that is progress. So a good mindfulness thing, you can do this with apophatic prayer as well, where you're just sitting and doing nothing, right? You will notice that the mind is very busy all the time, right? It's very busy all the time, especially if this is a thing for you. In meditation circles, we call this the monkey mind, because the monkey gets on the branches of the tree and jumps from branch to branch to branch to branch, right? And it's hard not to follow the monkey around. What's the monkey doing now, right? Our practice in this is to let the monkey go, to sit and say, oh, that thought came up, just notice it, be detached from it, and let it go. I've talked about this being sitting next to the river, and when a thought comes up, bubbles up, let it float down the river. Be like, I see you, I'll deal with you later, right? Just beep, beep. And every time that you do that, it's the same as the focus. You're teaching your brain to let go of it so that you can be in the present moment. Because what is anxiety? Anxiety is living in the future, where you're worried about what are the outcomes that are going to happen. Yeah, right? Conversely, depression is often living in the past, dwelling on what has happened. So there are many different ways that you can be mindful and that you can bring mindfulness into your everyday life. That can include things like slowing down what you're doing, only doing one thing at a time, and not distracting yourself with noise. How many of us, because we're anxious, we think, I'm going to turn the TV on, or I'm going to turn on, I put on a podcast or, whatever, and I'm going to let that part of my brain be entertained, and then I'm going to do the thing that I have to do, right? And all the while, we're feeling this thing coming up, right? It's because this kind of internal monologue keeps going while all those parts of the brain are going, and it festers, and we start to make up untrue stories that we start to believe, right? And the more we're distracted, the more we live in the future of those untrue stories, of those untrue outcomes that have not happened yet. So mindfulness is about slowing us down and making us pay attention. And the more that we do it, the more that we're able to train our brain to stay in that moment, in the present moment. Because in the present moment, most of the time, things are fine. Unless you're in the middle of an actual emergency, right? Think about your last stressful thing that you festered over. Were you actually fine most of the time? Actually, most of the time, everything was physically fine, and you wasted all of that energy on something. Yeah. All right, open heart. How many of you open heart? Was that a good one for you? Feelings of this kind of meditation includes feelings of a compassion for self and others, an increase of fast brain waves, or the gamma. It improves mood, become more empathetic, loving, and kind. It's a match for depression and relationship issues. Open heart meditations are very much connected to practices of gratitude. How many of you have done prayer practices that include being grateful? Yeah, it's a really great thing to do. The stickler for this with open heart is that you actually have to feel the feelings of being grateful and being loving. This is not a fake it till you make it thing. If you are in the middle of a very deep depression and you think, okay, I got to climb myself out of this, I got to do it somehow, so I'm going to do gratefulness stuff, right? I'm going to do journaling, or I'm going to do whatever. It can actually make your depression worse because you think, I'm never going to be able to attain those feelings. I know I'm supposed to feel these things about it. I'm never going to be able to feel those feelings. I'm a failure, right? So we don't start there when we're in the middle of a deep depression. We start at focus. We start at focus because we have to start reconnecting to our bodies and our minds of what's going on. And then, as things start to kind of stabilize, and you've gotten the medical attention that you need to get, right? Because often we need to get medical attention when we're in very deep states of depression. Then we can get to a place where that is not so far, because there's a part of our brain, the left side of our brain becomes activated or depressed. It becomes deactivated when we're in deep, deep depression. We need to get that moving again. And one of the things that's been comforting about this is it's that the think meat is malfunctioning. You haven't done anything wrong, and that there are actual things that we can do to help get us back on track, right? But open heart stuff, try doing a journal where you write 3 or 4 things that you're thankful for and spend some time just thinking about how you really are thankful, or you really do love that thing, or you really do love that person, and just send them love. One of my favorite forms of prayer is a healing prayer, and it's about imagining being on the mountaintop with Jesus in that transcendent white light in the Transfiguration story, and filling your body with divine love and presence, just imagining that warmth, and then imagining a person who needs that healing that you can share it with and love, and you sending it to them. It's a super powerful prayer, especially if you are a visual prayer. And some people are like, you can pray visually? Yes, you can pray visually. Not everybody can see images in their head, but it's a super helpful way to do that. Oh, we're running out of time. And it's a good match for the open heart one. Quiet mind. Quiet mind. Who needs quiet mind? All right. Spacious awareness and expanded consciousness, an increase of slow brain waves, minimize negative self-talk, experience peace and equanimity. It's a match for eating disorders, OCD, and a disrupted sense of self. This one, there are lots of different things that you can do with quiet mind. It actually fits quite well with some of the focus stuff that we do. And I don't want to get too deep into it because there's a lot of stuff with it, and we don't have that much time. But if that's something, if quiet mind was a thing for you and you want to know more about it, ask me about it later and I can tell you more about it. Some of the stuff that we talked about with focus does fit with it very well. This was a lot of information, right? Was any of it helpful for you? Yeah. Do you have a question or anything? Any questions? I am going to be this fall starting a prayer meditation group that I'm going to try to offer broadly in the community that will be covering and teaching about these different kinds of prayer modalities and meditation modalities for people. Because I'm getting the certification in this, I'll be able to kind of share that certification with other folks. And so I'm trying to decide, and if you guys are interested in this kind of thing, you can help me make this decision, if I'm going to do this on a Wednesday or a Thursday night. But it's something that we would do either here, in this room over here, or up in the Spirit Center up that way. But I need a little bit of time to figure out how I'm going to do it exactly, what the best way of teaching it. And it will be secular as well as specifically Christian. So it will have both components to it. Yeah. Here, hold on. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Severe.
Yeah, say that again.
If any of these feelings are very severe, especially depression, but even ADHD,
Yep.
We have a lot of newer medications now that don't interfere with your life with ADHD.
Yep.
And anti-anxiety medicines, antidepressant medicines, and things for eating disorders and OCD.
Yep.
So you got to have some self-awareness
Yes.
so that you get the medical help. Then
Yeah.
I think the medical help, though, will help you with the spiritual.
Exactly.
You know, the two of them are intertwined. The
Yep.
body is not
It
by
all works
itself
together.
separated from the mind. So if you treat one, you'll treat all of it.
Yep.
So there's nothing wrong with being on an antidepressant,
Not at all. Nope.
and that'll help you later with your spiritual life.
And I would say every time I do this, I say this is not a replacement for medical care.
You did a very good job of that, by the way.
Yeah, and because we talk about this stuff, I find that more people are actually getting medical care because of the conversation than not. The other thing that happens sometimes is that we discover that we have trauma that we didn't realize that we had. And sometimes when we do prayers that are focused on, like a body scan or something, or a prayer that's about incarnation of being aware of our body or whatever, that can be actually very triggering. And so I always try to say to people, any kind of prayer that you're doing, if you're very uncomfortable or if it's making you feel in a way that is not what you expected, right? It's done something to you. Actually physically get up and leave. Remove yourself from the situation because something is happening that was not intended. And then let's come back and let's have a conversation about it, because that might lead you to be able to get some help that you didn't know you needed. I will say for myself, I had a spiritual director that sat with me through all these things. He's a pastor, a spiritual director. He's also a psychologist, right? So he had all of this background and training to help me deal with some of my stuff that came up. I did apophatic prayer for a year, where I sat in silence and in darkness for at least an hour a day. For the first 6 months of that, I sat in silence and it was pitch black. No experience whatsoever. And he told me, keep sitting there. Most of us would give up, right? Now, I had other kinds of prayer that was happening too. Eventually, things started showing up in that darkness, and I learned that I was a visual prayer. Actual physical things started showing up in that prayer, and they were all aspects of myself, my ego that I had to deal with, all past traumas that I had to deal with, and I needed somebody to sit with me and say that it was going to get better. It did. It really did. It was a very intense experience for me, and it went from me in that time of my life thinking, nobody can help me, I'm sick, I'm never going to get better. If this is what life is, I don't want to be doing it, right? To, hey, I'm okay. Like, things are pretty good. I'm feeling well. Like, I'm having a good day, you know? And I also dismissed for myself the idea that wellness is about taking the magic pill and everything was going to be okay overnight. For me, what it was the visual for me was a glass that has a dark colored liquid in it, and you turn on the water and you fill it up, and slowly the water starts taking over the murky water, and eventually, over time, the water becomes clear. That's what healing felt like for me in that time. And all of it was about learning how to pay attention to what God was up to in my life. And it impacted all of these areas of my life that I can't, mind, body, spirit, as if they're three separate things. I can't treat them as three separate things. It's all one for me, right? And all of it's connected to body, yeah.
Is my go-to. I'm not developed in it. I'm not good at it.
You said silent prayer.
Silent prayer. But when I'm verbally praying, I get hung up on the words, and I think the words aren't adequate. They're not doing justice to my feelings, and then I get frustrated.
Yeah. And what I would say to that is we have a God who knows us better than we know ourselves, and that silence, all is communicated that needs to be communicated, right? Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions that are coming up? Now, my presentation is going to be completely different than what you're going to hear next week. I know for sure, because, well, we're different people. But Pastor Bob, you're going to be doing something next week. I hope I haven't derailed what you were planning on doing. But it might be going in a completely different direction. It might be building on things. But I hope that it is helpful. So, yeah. Oh, Hunting Magic Eels. Hunting Magic Eels, Recovering an Enchanted Faith in a Skeptical Age, by Richard Beck. Yeah, and a warning, you might love some of it, you might hate some of it. And it's just the book that kind of sparked the conversation that led to what we're doing for this. So you'll read it and be like, well, yeah, we kind of sort of touched on that, but not everything, right? I want to do an open heart meditation to end us up. We're going to do a modified prayer of St. Francis of Assisi. So remember, the idea with open heart meditation is that we actually try to feel and connect with the feelings that are brought up with this. So let us pray. Make me an instrument of peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. I invite you to sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. Gracious God, receive our prayers in loving kindness that we offer for the people, places, or things for which we are concerned. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you all. Oh, I only went 15 minutes over what I thought I was going to do. Only 15. Yes.